Whenever we use a source for something, we need to evaluate the source, especially its credibility and usefulness for what we're using it for. And there's a very helpful tool that we can use to help us evaluate the source, and that is called the CRAP test. So we'll be looking at how to use the CRAP test to evaluate sources. So really what we're looking at is my source credible? And to answer that question well, we are going to look at the source's currency, reliability, authority, and purpose. So we can use the acronym CRAP to help us remember those 4 areas. So first, currency. When we look at currency, we're looking at how recent the information is. And there are several questions that we can ask ourselves as we think about the currency of the source. So looking at how recent the information itself is, or how recently the website has been updated. And also considering if the information is current enough for the topic and purpose of our writing. Because sometimes that varies depending on what we need to use the source for. We can also look at the links. If there are a lot of broken links, then perhaps nobody has really been taking care of the web page, and perhaps information is not as trustworthy. So we need to keep in mind when thinking of currency that an acceptable date for one topic may not be acceptable for another. So look at this example. Which of these topics requires more current information, heart disease or the Civil War? Heart disease would, because research and science keeps advancing. So an article about heart disease 15 years ago is going to have different information than an article from last year. Now, if we're researching the Civil War, what happened during the Civil War has not changed in the last 50 years. So an older article is acceptable when doing that type of research. So currency depends on your topic as well. So let's look at an example in just a minute. Because when we look at a website, sometimes there are several dates on the website, and we need to make sure that we find the one that best fits with the information we're using. So if there's a date specific to the article, use that. If there's no date specific to the article, you can use the copyright date at the bottom of the page. Also be careful, because sometimes a website will have today's date on it, which will change every day and has nothing to do with the information there. Also with currency, if there's no specific date listed, we can look at the information itself and see if it matches with information from other sources that we have that does have dates. So that can help us determine currency even if there's not a date on the article itself. So let's look at this example. So we have an article here about alternative medicine from the Mayo Clinic website, and the date of publication or the date of last update is typically found at the top of the page or the bottom of the page. But if the article ends and the page keeps going, you might find the date in the middle of the page as well. So you really have to look around for that date. So we find here March 19th, 2011 for this article. If you were researching alternative medicine, would 2011 be current enough? Probably not. Since it's something health-related, medicine-related, it would be good to have more recent information, probably not older than 5 years, preferably 3 or less. The next part of the CRAP test is reliability. And so with reliability, we're really looking at the what of the source. With currency, we looked at when. Reliability, we looked at what. So we actually have to read some of the article to determine the reliability of the source. And these are some questions we can ask. Is the source biased? And true bias is when a source is limited to one perspective and does not acknowledge other perspectives. Sometimes it includes emotionally charged words. So biased sources doesn't mean we can't use them, but they might not be as credible as other sources. You can also ask, is the content of the resource primarily fact or opinion? Are statements supported with evidence? Can the facts be verified by other sources? Does the creator provide references or sources for data or quotations? And is the source well written? So if you find a source that includes a lot of references to other sources, that can increase the reliability of the source. If it seems just to be written based on the author's own experience, own opinions, then it's less reliable. Now, we mentioned biased sources before. Those can be useful sometimes. So, for example, if you are writing about a controversial topic such as abortion, you might mostly find biased sources, and you can determine how you want to balance sources from different perspectives. But when there are facts involved, you need to make sure you check the accuracy of those facts. Also, we look at the quality of the writing of sources because poor writing can indicate poor research. That's not a guarantee, but if someone hasn't taken the time to present their ideas well, perhaps they didn't take the time to make sure all the information in their source was accurate either. So let's take a look at this source. Remember, when you look at reliability, you have to read at least some of the source to determine that reliability. You can also scroll through the page to see if there are any sources listed. So if we take a look here at this part of the article, we can see that even though there aren't any sources listed, the page seems to be very fact-based instead of opinion-based, which makes it appear reliable. Our next part of the CRAP test is authority. So here we're looking at the who. These are some questions that you can ask for authority. Who is the creator or author? What are the author's credentials? Credentials are just experience or degrees that an author has that show they have expertise in an area. Is the author an expert in the area he or she is writing about? Now, it's important to check that because anyone can publish anything on the internet and they're not necessarily an expert in that area, even though they're an expert in a different area. So, for example, as an English teacher, if I wrote something about grammar, you could probably consider me to have good authority on that topic. However, if I wrote about gardening, which I have some experience in but don't have any training in, I wouldn't be an expert. It would just be information that I happen to know. So that source would not have good authority. You can also look at who the publisher or sponsor is. So in other words, the organization that is publishing the information. And does the author and or sponsor have a good reputation? And sometimes we have to do a little digging to find that out. We do need to keep in mind that just because a source doesn't have an author, that doesn't mean that the source is not credible. The organization sponsoring that article or information could be very credible, could have good authority. But if there is no author, the sponsoring organization must have a good reputation. And you might need to do a little research to figure that out. So let's take a look here at our example article. We see the author up by the article title here. It says by Mayo Clinic staff. So we don't have a specific person listed as the author, but we do have this group of people. Usually that author is listed right below the article title or near the article title or at the bottom of the page. Sometimes there's no author at all. And we can scroll down and see the Mayo Foundation for Medical Education and Research is the sponsoring organization. You can typically find the sponsoring organization next to the copyright date way at the bottom of the page here. Now, Mayo Clinic has a very good reputation in the field of medicine, so this source does have very good authority even though there wasn't a specific person listed on the article. And the final part of the CRAP test is purpose. So now we're looking at the why. And we need to consider both the purpose of the article that you're reading as well as your own purpose. Here are some questions you can ask. Are there advertisements on the website? If there are a lot of ads, perhaps the purpose of the article is to get your attention there so that you might click on an ad. What is the domain of the site? The domain is the .com, .org, which I'll get into those in just a minute. What is the purpose of the source? Is the purpose to inform, persuade, sell products, or entertain? Now, just because a source has one of these purposes doesn't mean you can't use it, but you need to be aware of how you can best use the source if you choose to use it at all. And does the website's purpose complement your purpose for researching? Also, does the information complement your purpose? If it doesn't fit with your purpose, then the information will be irrelevant and you can't use it anyway. So the domains, there are a lot of different domains. .com is usually profit-based and usually less, possibly less credible, not always. .edu is usually a college or university that brings with it a little more credibility. .org can be good, but remember Wikipedia is a .org, and that one's not very trustworthy because of its lack of authority. .gov is another common one, and typically those sources are fairly credible. So remember, you need to look at the whole page and the page as a whole to determine its purpose. So if we look here, we see that it's mayoclinic.org. We know it's an organization. Remember, when we look at purpose, we're looking at the why. Like, what is the reason this source is here? There are a few ads on this page, but the overall purpose seems to be to inform. So, we've gone through all of these pieces, but it's important to think of the source as a whole. So it's good to keep track of each of the pieces. So just as a reminder, the source we're looking at, it's a bit old, so currency isn't great. It's fairly reliable. The information is based on fact, not opinion. However, there were no sources listed. It has great authority because Mayo has a good reputation in the field of medicine. And the purpose is decent. There are a few ads, but the overall purpose seems to be informed. So my overall evaluation of this source is that it has strong reliability and authority, but I might not be able to use it because of the date. So it would really depend on exactly how I wanted to use this source to figure out whether or not it's a good one to use. So remember, when using the CRAP test, we're really trying to answer the question, is my source credible? So we're looking at currency, reliability, authority, and purpose to help us make that determination. Also, we need to think of our own purpose, because if I'm just looking for information for my own knowledge and growth, I might be able to use a source that isn't as strong in each of these areas. But if I'm using a source for a research paper, it does need to be very, very credible and strong in almost all of these areas without any significant weaknesses. So, hopefully from this video you understand a little bit more about how to use the CRAP test to evaluate the credibility of sources.